pre-submissions are a way to enable FDA to get them early access or exposure to your technology and your ideas, get them thinking about maybe whatever you're doing that might be new or novel. And so they can be really powerful ways to almost have a safety feature built into the your review. And it's free still. I don't know how long it's going to stay free with the changing MDUFAs. I would be surprised if they don't start charging. So, common topics that you talk about in a pre-sub are, usually your regulatory pathway and your strategy. It could be clinical, it could be your benchtop performance testing. And then again, the overall goal is familiarization, especially for devices, novel technologies, to introduce the FDA in advance. So keep calm. Remember, especially if you're doing a meeting, you want to make sure that you're not repeating yourself or repeating just the content that's already in the pre-submission. FDA has read it over and over again at this point, so that would be a waste of time. You can't ask the FDA what do they think. They can't consult. It's more like you tell them what you think and then get feedback. And then in the meeting, don't introduce new topics or questions, and don't talk too much. So FDA never forgets. It doesn't matter. I have had clients who did not tell me that they had done a pre-submission 10 years ago, and I found out while we were doing a pre-submission now. So FDA will know that you had a previous submission, and they will look at the feedback that they gave you. So what we have found to be successful is to be specific in building your story and keep it focused down to 3 or 4 substantial topics in a single pre-sub, because the more you throw at the FDA, the more resources they have to get involved with. And so your quality of background kind of sinks, or the feedback sinks based off of having too broad and too many different topics. And so with different topics, I completely isolate for pre-subs. I might have 1, 2, or 3 pre-subs based off of the strategy and the need for advice in these areas. So I think clinical should always be standalone. Your more comprehensive or technical questions, the FDA is going to spend too many resources and be spread too thin to give in-depth feedback. We find it very successful to actually quote FDA guidance documents or standards or feature-specific questions directly out of those guidance documents. Because then you put FDA in a position to argue with itself. So Appendix 2 of the pre-sub guidance document is really powerful because it has a list of questions that the FDA feels like will lead to the most valuable feedback. And so this is where I have had FDA tell me that question's not appropriate for a pre-sub, it's for a 513G. And I was like, no, ma'am, it's not. Like, if you would read, your Appendix 2, question 5, it's like right there that this is appropriate for a pre-submission. So anyways, so there's a lot of examples of questions out of just about any area. And so it's really, it's Appendix 2 is the most helpful thing in the guidance document. So that was the draft that was in March 2024. It was just finalized in May. And so it added a section on PMA 100-day meetings, and it clarified interactions outside of the Q submission program that could be appropriate for informal interactions rather than having to ask those questions through the pre-submission. But it gets confusing because it doesn't tell you how to ask or who to ask about that informal review or informal question asking or clarification meetings. So for that informal feedback, you know, again, if you don't have a lead reviewer like you would in a pre-submission, who do you even send these questions to? There's also no metrics for the response time for those informal requests. So we're still kind of seeing how those are going to play out. So what we've seen so far in 2025. So FDA has a new quarterly MDUFA review. And so now some information is available, you know, well before that their annual summary report. And so you can see how the FDA is trending on its metrics a little easier. So for 510K review times, they recently came out with this report that says overall 510Ks are getting cleared at 127 days, and that the average FDA days to review is 72 and industry is 55. So their pre-submission review times, they are pretty much on target for their goals, be it the written feedback or for to schedule a meeting. So this is an area where I'm curious for everybody's feedback, because we have seen that they are on the money for scheduling those things or providing them on time or even early. So again, their performance metrics, for how many days, their average days of 61 for a 60-day turnaround. Well,
Agreed, Michelle.
Yes.
Agreed, Michelle.
Okay, that's good. So I just think that that's interesting with all, you know, all the turnover from COVID, followed by all the reductions in force, followed by the rehiring of all the FDA people that were riffed. Like that the data here, like you would think that that this is the highest functioning FDA's been in a while. So it's just an interesting piece of information. So our general impressions from what we're seeing from the agency is that we're seeing the quality of their feedback, especially for written feedback, has improved. And we're not sure if this is because the employees are finally becoming more efficient and better understanding actual FDA policy, as opposed to making it in like an academic pursuit, like it feels like it's been in the past years. But definitely, I think all the reductions in force have put a greater pressure on the reviewers. Over the last several years, we were getting really odd feedback where they just wouldn't answer questions in the pre-sub that were clearly within the scope of a pre-sub. And they just said, well, that if you want to know that kind of information, that's the kind of thing that you have to turn in a 513G for. And we were getting that regularly. And then now I have not seen that question in probably a year of pre-submissions. So and we're overall seeing more consistency in applications of concepts and the use of reference devices. So some areas where we have seen and gotten odd feedback are you know, FDA defines this term, we all know, intended use and indications for use. But now if you look at especially people that are getting warning letters, there was one that came out just a few weeks ago to a company called Whoop that basically says that FDA considers an inherent use, not just an intended use and indications for use, but inherent use could have something like a material or a feature that implies a claim inherently in the market in people's minds, or it flat out has say like a claim and they're trying to say something like blood pressure monitoring for wellness purposes, but the public knowledge, people know that blood pressure, you know, is really related to hyper or hypotension, and so therefore the public will use this wellness device to make decisions about their medical healthcare or status. So have you guys, what kind of feedback or things have you seen where people are getting pushback about this concept of inherent use? Like, I know in COVID, like if you had an antimicrobial feature, that automatically implies in public knowledge that it has some sort of ability to kill, you know, the germs. So has anybody else seen this?
Those, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jose.
I was gonna say, it makes me think of the whole episode with Whoop, right? I don't know if you guys have followed that, but they're providing blood pressure, and they're like, oh, we're just a wellness and fitness product, but some of the stuff they're saying around blood pressure is sort of inherently implies that it's meant for medical. So just one example that comes to mind.
Exactly.
Yep. It's all around, it all seems to be around the wellness and the AI and the SAMDs. There's been a lot of untitled letters and devices that seem to be trying to get away with it, but the inherent use or the wellness devices, they're really going after those claims. And even with the wound dressings, they reclassified them as class 3s now. So antimicrobials, now they're class 3. And I had one that went in and they said, nope, now you're class 3 and you need to do 3 years worth of, clinicals to even get it through. So now, it was a Swedish company and now they're doing veterinarian wound care. So, and it was a great device.
So this brings up the idea of there being this fuzzy line between wellness devices and medical devices. And you're seeing it in Europe with the CRA, the Cyber Resilience Act, where they're saying devices covered under MDR are explicitly exempt from CRA. However, ... there is this
Here's
continuum.
your untitled letter.
Yeah, there's this continuum of is it a wellness device or is it a medical device? And where is that line? And that line is moving thanks to technology.
My favorite are when people are like, we want to be general wellness but we think we fall within this CPT reimbursement code. I'm like, no, you're not, you can't put a foot in both of those worlds at the same time. And so people, like Carrie said, I think have taken a lot of liberties with trying to say that they're general wellness. And I find my clients that are adamant about their general wellness, like you give them these boundaries in which they can be in general wellness, and they just can't stay within the bounds. It's like a scope creep of their indications in marketing. So,
They want the reimbursement. And they're like, until we get caught, we're going to do it. And we don't want to listen to you regulatory people. So
the other thing is when the wellness guidance came out, I was really skeptical that was how it was going to end up, because it just seemed too good to be true.
The marketing people aren't reading it, nor are they going to listen.
No, of course not. They don't care. They just want to get the product out and sell it.
Well, that leads.
But this is where it gets throw marketing under the bus, though.
No.
This is where it gets tricky because you have to be aware of label and labeling requirements. And so when you do your labeling description, that's really where you have to be smart as to how do you pick the wording. That's what's going to make a difference between you making a medical claim and making let's say, a therapeutic claim, or even making a wellness claim.
Yeah, but it's not just the labeling. So they can do everything right with labeling. It goes into their social media, aka their marketing approach, because like I have a social media procedure that everybody has to get anything pre-approved through. It's very simple, but so many people, they drift. Oh, I can make this claim. I can make this claim. And I'm like, no, you can't make that claim because it's not in your labeling. And so, it's twofold. It's being aware of your claims, your labeling, and the applicable regulations, and understanding you need somebody from regulatory to approve any post that you're putting out there, because it's easy to drift.
Absolutely right. Any promotionals that you make, if they make medical claims, or whatever, they are part of your extended labeling
Say it, it's a
claims.
label.
Your
Comes out of your
website,
mouth.
social media, all those
And
things.
it's interesting. A lot of people, my new clients will go, "Oh no, social media is not a big deal. The FDA doesn't look at it." The first thing in January, my FDA inspector told us was, "I was looking at your website last night and your social media posts." I mean, that was the first thing that came out, and I'm like, "See, they're looking at this before they come on site."
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Michelle. In Europe, you have it's slightly different, the consequences of doing that. You have the claims, Article 7 in MDR, IVDR about claims. But you also have upcoming the new liability directive. And that's basically says that if someone wants to make a claim for liability, they need to prove it. And to do that, they need access to the tech file. And if the tech file doesn't materialize or the tech file doesn't cover the risk it should cover, then the claim is awarded. And that last bit is what's going to bite if you make these claims. Because then you may not have the right risk management done for the particular device, for the particular use that you have claimed in your marketing. But there you go. If someone suffers damage, whatever, you have a claim. So that's something that's going to work, I guess.
Hey, Michelle, quick question, because I'm just listening to this conversation. It kind of apparent to me, I was on the engineering side when I was doing testing for medical devices. It seems to me that just this conversation right here kind of illuminates why so many medical device companies, especially startups, go sideways with the FDA because they don't know what you're talking about right now.
Mm-hmm.
Is this why there's so many recalls? Because the folks at these smaller to mid-size or some of the large ones are kind of trying to skirt around the regulations, thinking they can sneak through stuff because of nuances like inherent use, stuff like that?
I personally think the bulk of the recalls are coming from some of the largest companies that are trying to that basically they say they're too big, like they ignore FDA. Like, what is FDA really going to do to Boston Scientific or Phillips or whatever, you know? And so they have like just such bad design practices. It just for the whole history of products, like infusion pumps has been a train wreck for probably
Clarification.
10 years. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I worked there.
And like I know
I saw it.
some people that worked on infusion pump 510K that the FDA was like, okay, you guys have made too many changes. And while individually it looks like you could have written a letter to file, you need to do a 510K now. Well, they didn't even have like the FDA in their review asked for like some prints or some drawings or something. They didn't have any print drawings for their components. So they had to go make like 1,000 drawings for this product. I'm like, how does it get made? If you don't have a drawing, you know?
Where's your design control then?
Well, and a quick question. The reason I'm asking all this is I'm working with an incubator here in San Diego called Aquilius, and they support, it's all medical device companies, and they're growing. And so I'm out there fairly routinely just to kind of support this incubator to grow. And so this is the stuff that I like knowing from what you're presenting today, so that I can hopefully share with all the startups out there to avoid what you're talking about now. And it just kind of scares me that they're out there trying to bring products to market, and most of them don't know any of this stuff. They're learning maybe the basics, and then they're just going to hit that wall. So
exactly. I see more like you say, those startups and small companies hit the wall rather than the first thing out is safety problems. Like they get themselves, they put themselves out of business almost with the claims that they're making. So if somebody else was started
So
talking.
I want to make sure that we have time to get through everything. Michelle, how are we doing in terms of the slides?
Well, we knew we were going to get sidetracked in a lot of conversations here, so we're fine.
Okay, good.
I will move on because I'm also interested in people's experience and reaction here.
Okay, so before you move on, I want to make a couple announcements. One, if you'd like to be promoted to panelist, just raise your hand electronically. I sort of lost track of who I promoted and who I didn't, and I don't want to keep asking the same people. That's number one. Number two, next week, please join us for Ari Henkin, who's going to be talking about AI for regulatory affairs and the solution that he built in-house and is bringing to market, and it's pretty neat. So you're not going to want to miss it. And there are a lot of opportunities, particularly for consultants, to engage with him and work with him directly on introducing it to your clients, etc. You know what I mean. So if you're on this call, you don't need to re-register for next week's call. You'll get an invite. You'll be let in. But if you want to invite new people, they should go to medgroup.biz/calls and register, which will be updated later today. I'm still working on that janky interface. I apologize for that. And we have lots of people here, so let's move on.
Okay, so this is directly out of some pre-submission feedback that we had gotten. And, this particular question was on biocompatibility, and FDA came back and said, we know that silicone is carcinogenic, mutagenic, and reprotoxic substance, which adds risk to the intended patient population. And we recommend that you justify the use of this material with biocompatibility testing as you proposed. So, oh, and then also the FDA specifically referenced 14971. So, anyhow, so we kind of pushed back on this on this statement here, in a follow-up meeting, and it turns out it was the doctor that was a consultant, like a physician, practicing physician that FDA had consult here, and she's like, oh well. I'm not really the biocompatibility expert. That was just my thought and concern. And so it's like, okay, stricken from the record, stay in your lane, lady. She was not and so to me, the FDA lead reviewer should have taken the responsibility of saying, thank you for that thought, but that's not our policy here. So we're not going to put in the pre-submission. So don't be afraid to push back on stuff, especially if it sounds kind of off the wall.
Can I reiterate that again? Please don't be afraid to push back to your FDA reviewers and these Q subs and get it stricken from the record.
Yep.
Because otherwise it's going to live with your submission all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
Say it again, Michelle, so everybody hears that.
If the FDA gives you a feedback that seems like it's coming from left field, you need to push back because you don't.
All right.
Yeah. You don't know if the person who even provided that comment is an expert in that area.
And ask them where it's coming from and provide the black and white evidence, because that right there.
Yep. And something else I've had that's been kind of weird.
Don't be afraid to push back.
Is that FDA's like, well, we are aware internally of another product that does such and such. Well, that's not public record.
You the name of the product, and that's not public record. Sorry, I just said the same thing you did, Michelle. Sorry.
We're in the Wi-Fi together, Harry.
Yeah, they can't give you that information, so therefore they can't bring that up in your meeting without giving you the black and white evidence. Therefore, provide us the black and white evidence where that needs to, because that's irrelevant to our product. So give us the scientific evidence where you're giving us that is relevant to our product. I could care less about another company's product.
Yep.
That has nothing to do with our product.
So we've had the case where FDA did not understand essential performance, which is a 601 issue, and it's affected multiple clients. And so my partner and I have actually sat down and trained FDA on the issue for EMC testing and had about 50 or 60 reviewers in the meeting, plus
Correct.
most of the EMC safety lab, plus some other people involved. So we had about 70 people on the call, and they actually agreed with 95% of the material.
And they
that
will ask you
engaged-
back for other calls where the FDA does not know about that subject, as they will ask you back as subject matter experts if they do not understand that. And that has happened to me and other subject matter experts where we know more than the FDA and they're unclear about that topic. So don't be afraid to push back or
I
ask.
think that's a good thing that they know when they need to ask.
And
Michelle?
don't be afraid when
we
you know when
pushed
to ask.
back to say that.
Yeah.
I, having the connections with the right people and saying something to them helps too. Because it's
Correct.
not just pushing back, but saying something
Knowing when,
gently
yeah.
through the
Well,
right
and
connections.
And
Yes.
Leo being one of the most well-known experts on 60601,
601 guy.
just in all
Bring
the
Leo
committees,
in.
we're not all going to be able to like pull a connection at FDA and have 70 people show up to hear us talk about something.
Oh yeah, if
But
anybody missed his presentation on 60601, type 60601.
Good God, that was a gut punch. That's all I'll have to say.
into the chat, and I'll send you the YouTube link. We have a new YouTube channel. People subscribe. MedTech Leading Voice Exchange on YouTube.
Oh, cool.
Okay. So the other thing is we have seen FDA using inappropriate clinical reviewers. So we had a product that was a catheter for men, and the only people it was 3 clinical reviewers. All 3 were not only female, all 3 only practiced female urology. They did not have a male urologist or anybody that treated male urinary issues on the panel. So, and they said, well, we learned about, just because we don't practice on men doesn't mean we don't know. We had to learn it in medical school. And like,
that was how long ago? So you absolutely asked for a specialist who knows about male urology, period, or whatever your product subject is. They need to find that specialist.
Yep. But they had their own clinical reviewer on the meeting, and all they said that was one of the world's leading practicing male urologists, and they just basically said they didn't care what he had to say. Like, no, this just period. We think this is high risk. So, anyways. This is another odd thing that we've gotten a lot lately, is that the multi-office interactions are really challenging. Where, in the past, if you take the concept of like a Foley catheter that has a temperature sensor in it, and this example is right out of the guidance talking about how to use a reference device. You have a Foley catheter that has intended use to drain urine. You have a temperature sensor that has an intended use of sensing temperature. Individually, they are their own cleared devices, but you can put them together as long as you don't change the intended use or features of the Foley catheter or the temperature sensor. You can use, in that case, you can use a reference device for the temperature sensor and a primary predicate of the urinary catheter. So that's a guidance document example. But lately we have seen anything that we have that it's been just as straightforward technology wise and just as simple as putting 2 already cleared things that are already used together in actually the same device. And the FDA told us No, if we have to consult with another division, you need two separate 510Ks because we can't cross share the review.
And that's
I-
new.
Yeah.
You use the intercenter consult process?
Do what?
The intercenter consult process, I mean, it was specifically put in place for combination products, but it also is used for things like this. So I'm really surprised that they're not making use of it.
Okay. Can you write that in the chat? I have not, so I can, I want to look that up later.
Okay.
Have you
I'm
talked
not familiar with
to
that.
Scott Colburn about this too? Because I would think this is an issue he'd be able to manage too.
You think so? Because he's on the evaluation of the recognized consensus standards.
Yeah, I know, but he has a lot of sway.
Okay.
He's a mover and shaker.
Okay. That's good to know. I have worked with him in the past, but it was like when I was on some enteral feeding councils a while back.
Yeah, I understand that.
Michelle Daniel wrote a great comment. Mr. XFDA guy.
Can
Do not
somebody-
assume the reviewers are knowledgeable or experienced, and make sure your presentation is as simple as possible.
Yep.
Write it at a 5th grade level, right, Daniel?
That's exactly my point, because sometimes we make these assumptions, and when they know less than you do, they could become defensive, and then the meeting is not going to go well.
Yep.
Because they're going to be insecure. So this is what I have experienced both inside and outside the FDA. The more insecure and the less knowledgeable they are, the more dangerous they become.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the other
Yeah.
thing is how invested they are. Like one of my clients is struggling to get approved. They've actually had to challenge it, and the person on the reviewer is in their late 70s and has been in that same industry, and therefore the product that they're trying to get released directly competes with probably things he's invested in. And so that's what that's the premise that they're challenging the decisions on the 510K. Because all the pre-subs were going along, everything was going great. You know, they were kind of iffy on some of the clinical data, but they're like, you know, all the pre-subs were positive, and then they got rejected, and they're like, wait a minute, this is not adding up to what we, you know, discussed.
Mm-hmm. So again, with the multi office interactions, they said the procedures and probes are reviewed by different divisions within the FDA. The devices have different intended uses. The procedures are carried out by different medical specialties, and the two procedures have different risks. And then they try to reference a guidance document on bundling or multiple it was totally in left field compared to what we were asking and trying to accomplish. And so it says, accordingly, please unbundle your IFU statement such that you submit a marketing submission specific to the use of the probes, which would be reviewed by OHT 8, and a second marketing submission specific to the use of the other part of the device, which would be reviewed by OHT 3. So that's the actual wording that they used. And so side note, I think I shared with you guys a few meetings ago, I had worked with a client earlier this year where they make it's like basically vibrators, and FDA came after them and said, you are advertising these for vaginal use, and the product code and doesn't specify female, and the only devices that have been cleared for this are for males. And so vibrators are illegally marketed if they don't have a 510K because they're intended for males and not females. Don't have to comment on that one. Just wild.
Yeah, that was my facial wow.
On that call, I told him, I said, as a woman, not even as a regulatory professional, as a woman, I am offended that this is where you are spending your time and resources. Of all the things that are wrong in women's health, of all the things that are hurting women, this is the very limited thing that you are focused on right now. And there were 6 FDA people on that call. And I'm like, anyway.
I think we need a stand-up comedy because it reiterates something I've been talking about with my team, is that FDA individuals are human. We've put them on, and I don't even want to call it a pedestal. We've elevated them to be all knowing, and the reality is they're not all knowing. You have to go the extra mile to be confident in what you do know so you can challenge appropriately.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But they are human. We have to keep in mind they're human.
Yep.
They're human. They're human.
Which means they're fallible. So we've also gotten some weird feedback about clinical trials related to the OUS market. And so they said you propose to conduct the clinical trial sites outside of the US. Comparison of the user population and clinical practices at your study sites to the US provider population and standard practice. They need to do that. And then in general, we recommend that marketing submissions that provide clinical data from OUS studies include at least 3 sites, at least 75% US enrollment to account for differences in population and clinical practice across different sites for each clinical investigation conducted with OUS data. That 75% of your data has to come from the US. And that for that 25 other percent, you have to do this in-depth comparison about the population clinical practice.
Ronald, comment?
I've heard this a lot. Just saying, I've heard this one a lot,
well,
other than from human factors where it's 100%.
I work with clients and they say, yeah, we're going to do a study in the US. And I say, are you sure? Because the whole healthcare system is so different that you may end up with completely uncomparable patient population. It really happens. And so I'm very careful in those locations. Having said that, we just had a very good study done in Africa, and the data is used and the notified body had no problem with accepting that for Europe, because we managed to extrapolate those data. That worked very well. But but what I see in Europe is that you can just justify, if you can justify it, it's fine, but you must be able to justify it. And having something like, okay, you must have 75% blah de blah, doesn't make sense, because you cannot compare that. It's no, I don't think it's practical. But I mean, you have to live with that in the US over there. I have my own problems, but
Okay. Okay, so that's the bulk of my slide. So what are some of the other regulatory challenges that you guys have seen where you're like, wait, what? Like, why are we doing that now?
So back to the clinical trials thing, getting ready to do a webinar with with a CRO from Europe on clinical trial expectations country by country, like where you should do your clinical trials in Europe and why. It's going to be pretty interesting. Excited about that.
Moving back a little bit more towards, kind of being policy and objective, whereas before I felt like we were just talking to a bunch of people right out of graduate programs that never worked in the industry. And so every pre-submission was like an academic debate instead of an objective assessment that was based on both FDA policy and, a real predicate comparison. But they were often hypothetical land, most of the time. So, Andre?
Thanks, Michelle. You always provide great information. Appreciate that. We've got a situation we're working on right now where a client has brought us a product that was previously in a pre-sub in 2023, but that company stopped all their effort on it, and now they're picking it up. And the question is, should we be referring, or can you refer back to the original pre-sub response from the FDA and just continue on, even though that was from a different company?
I think you'd have to explain the relationship there. And then, yes, I would think that you should be able to do that. But even explain that in the cover letter.
Great. Okay, thanks.
So I'm going to take a minute and ask Jose a question. I am negotiating a contract with a new customer who is insisting on using all of their agreements, and no offense, Ronald, they're from Europe. So the things that they're asking for are like in like a service agreement. I'm like, that, what are you talking about? Like, I can't agree to that. But one of them is like, they asked me for a copy of my cybersecurity policy for how I handle my client data. And I'm like, we don't have one. I said, but if you want to send us yours, I'll take a look at it and see what we may already be doing that complies. And so, like, what are your, have you heard of anybody being asked for a cybersecurity policy like that, like a service provider like us?
Oh, yes.
I personally haven't seen it, but I know we have one. And I mean, I think in your QMS, I think it's recommendable to have, both how are you implementing cybersecurity for the products that you develop, but also what's your internal cybersecurity policy? Because, if you're not training your team, for example, like keep in mind, like I always tell people, like the number one source of real vulnerabilities in cybersecurity is humans, right? You can have all the encryption in the world, but if you don't train your team on how to properly see when somebody's attempting a phishing attack, then you've got tremendous vulnerabilities. So you want to have, an SOP for your company and how you treat data and how you, what controls you have in place and that sort of thing. Absolutely. It's kind of funny. Like we never get asked, maybe just because people assume that we, employ best practices. But I recommend to companies to have that in place. Yeah.
I just had a funny
And
thought.
this is
Like, what if I asked AI to write me an internal cybersecurity policy?
I think
the bigger the company, the more likely you're going to get asked this. We've been asked by BD, Medtronic, J&J, every one of them. When this got busy, they came to us and said, "Yep, here it is." But your big guys, your little guys typically don't. But it's
I've had
major companies.
I've had mediums do it too, because I have a design house I work for that is, I'd say, not even medium ask for one, and I've had multiple Fortune 500s ask for ones too.
If you're doing business with a Fortune 500, they're going to ask.
Yeah, and I have multiple Fortune 500s I work for.
That's been our experience.
If you place capital equipment, medical devices in hospitals, they're going to be asking, and it's got any kind of connectivity, they're going to be asking you about information security. And that's a little bit where I see the whole noise about cybersecurity is missing things completely. You can have a device without any connectivity at all, and you should have information security for that device.
Will somebody share theirs with Michelle?
Yes, that was exactly.
I was going to say, can you share it with me too? Because I'm going to be writing mine.
Yeah, but mine's such a small company. We have a lot of outs. We don't.
Michelle needs a lot of outs.
So do I.
Okay.
Exactly. Because I'm not designing anything.
We don't design squat.
Yeah,
The risk that they worry about is, it's funny because, like, just to go full circle to what we were talking about at the outset, AI, for example, right, and all your large language models, you can set them up to protect your data, or you can set them up so that your data trains the models, right? And so if you have a policy in place, then you have a means of showing that your team follows proper procedures to protect your data that way. But you don't have to be a design house. If people are sending you their proprietary information and you don't have proper controls in place and training for your team, then there's a decent chance that their proprietary information is going to get leaked to the outside world. And that's what they're looking to protect against. So it's not about design. It's about like they're sharing sensitive information with you. What assurances do they have that you're going to properly manage it?
Right. A QMS is intellectual property, right? So you create a SOP for someone. That is intellectual property. And then someone in your company says, oh, that's good. I'll take that with me. So they stick a USB stick in the drive. People don't lock down their USBs enough. They should just be locking down so people can't take data. They'll still put it across on OneDrive or something, but you
I
have
share
to.
I shared a story from like 10 years ago where an accountant clicked a link that automatically transferred $40,000 out of the business account. An accountant, and it was like, okay, and it was a phishing email. It was like something they shouldn't have clicked it, and thank God they had insurance because they got the money back. But it's like it's that simple. Having that policy, don't open an email that you don't recognize. It can be just that basic.
Absolutely, yeah. I heard a CISO of a major hospital network saying that 90% of their cybersecurity incidences are phishing, right? So they're just phishing attacks to doctors who aren't properly trained on how to sniff out sensitive email sequences. And by the way, that's an area where, AI is having huge impact on cybersecurity, because one of the primary means of attacking people is through human engineering, like knowing how to get people to give you information that they shouldn't be giving you. And AI is excellent at writing persuasive copy and stuff. Those emails that you used to get that you could immediately sniff out because they were so poorly written are now very well written and structured.